I want half of everything, including your father's money, Crystal announced with that sugar-sweet voice that used to drive me wild. Now it just made my skin crawl. We were sitting in Derek Palmer's law office in downtown Dallas, the city's skyline glittering behind us like fool's gold. My name is Richard Holt. I'm 48 years old, and I never thought I'd be sitting across from my wife of 6 years, watching her try to rob me blind with the help of the sleaziest divorce attorney in Texas. Crystal looked stunning, as always. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her designer dress, one I'd paid for naturally, hugged her figure just right. At 36, she could still turn heads when she walked into a room. That's exactly how she'd hooked me 6 years ago when I was a lonely 42-year-old widower running my engineering consulting firm. Mr. Holt, Derek Palmer leaned forward with his shark-like smile. Texas is a community property state. Your wife is entitled to 50% of all marital assets, including any inheritance received during the marriage. I kept my face neutral, but inside I was smiling. These idiots had no idea what was coming. Palmer's briefcase was stuffed with documents outlining how Crystal planned to walk away with half of the $3, $2 million I'd inherited from my father 18 months ago. The money that had transformed my comfortable middle-class life into something approaching wealth. Crystal twisted her wedding ring, a 2-carat diamond I'd bought her during our whirlwind romance. Richard, honey, let's just make this easy. We both know this marriage is over. I just want what's fair. Fair. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Was it fair when she'd been screwing her personal trainer behind my back for the past 8 months? Was it fair when she'd quit her airline hostess job the minute my father's estate cleared probate? Was it fair when she'd been planning this divorce while lying in our bed every night? The worst part was I'd seen it coming from miles away. Crystal had never been subtle about her priorities. When we first met at that Dallas Business Association mixer, she'd been more interested in my company's client list than my personality. But I'd been grieving my first wife's death from cancer, and Crystal's attention felt like sunshine after a long winter. Mrs. Holt has been an equal partner in this marriage, Palmer continued, shuffling through his papers. She's provided emotional support, maintained the household, and sacrificed her own career advancement to support Mr. Holt's business success. I almost laughed out loud. Crystal's idea of maintaining our household was hiring a cleaning lady and ordering takeout. As for emotional support, she'd checked out of our marriage the moment the inheritance hit my accounts. But I played my part perfectly. I understand your position, I said calmly. However, I believe there are some documents you might want to review before we proceed. Palmer's eyebrows shot up. What kind of documents? I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a manila envelope, a prenuptial agreement. The temperature in that downtown office seemed to drop 20 degrees. Crystal's face went white, then flushed red. What are you talking about, Richard? We never signed anything like that. Palmer practically lunged across his desk. Mr. Holt, if such an agreement existed, we would have been informed during discovery. This is highly irregular. I handed the envelope to Palmer, keeping my eyes locked on Crystal's panicked face. I think you'll find everything is perfectly legal and properly executed. Crystal was shaking her head frantically. This is impossible. I would remember signing something that important. Oh, but she had signed it. 6 years ago, 3 weeks before our wedding, when she was so focused on planning our honeymoon in Tuscany that she'd barely glanced at the papers I'd asked her to sign. Just insurance policies and household arrangements, I'd told her then. Boring legal stuff my attorney insists on. She'd signed without reading a word. Too busy picking out wedding flowers and menu options to care about fine print. Palmer tore open the envelope with shaking hands, and I watched his face transform from confidence to confusion to absolute horror as he read the first page. The prenup was ironclad. I'd learned from my first marriage. My late wife and I had built our life together from nothing, but I'd seen too many good men destroyed by greedy second wives. When I'd met Crystal, something in my gut told me to be careful. Smart money always hedges its bets. Looking back, the warning signs were written in neon letters. But grief makes you stupid and loneliness makes you desperate. I'd met Crystal at the Dallas Business Association's annual charity gala in 2018. My first wife, Jennifer, had been gone for 2 years by then, and I was finally ready to dip my toes back into dating. At 42, I wasn't exactly a catch. Graying hair, dad bod, workaholic tendencies. But my engineering firm was doing well, and I owned a nice house in Preston Hollow. Crystal was working the event as part of the airline's corporate hospitality team. She was 30, gorgeous, and somehow fascinated by my stories about structural engineering projects. "You're so accomplished," she'd say, hanging on every word about load-bearing calculations and foundation stress tests. What I thought was genuine interest was actually reconnaissance. Our courtship was a masterclass in manipulation. Crystal would show up at my office with lunch, claiming she wanted to learn about my business. She'd ask detailed questions about my clients, my contracts, my financial projections. I thought she was being supportive. She was doing due diligence. The sex was incredible, which didn't hurt her cause. After 2 years of celibacy, having a beautiful woman 20 years younger worship my body was intoxicating. Crystal knew exactly what she was doing, making me feel like I was the most desirable man in Texas. When she suggested moving in together after 6 months, I was thrilled. When she quit her airline job to focus on our relationship, I was flattered. When she started hinting about marriage, I was ready. "Life's too short to wait," she'd said, echoing words that seemed romantic then but sound calculated now. "I know what I want and I want you." The proposal was her idea, though she made me think it was mine. We were at my favorite steakhouse when she started talking about her biological clock and how successful men needed strong women beside them. By dessert, I was planning the ring purchase. My attorney, Walter Briggs, had tried to warn me. "Richard, you barely know this woman. A prenup isn't romantic, but it's smart protection for a man in your position." I'd been resistant at first. It felt like starting a marriage with one foot out the door. But Walter was persistent, and something deep in my gut agreed with him. Getting Crystal to sign was easier than I'd expected. I presented it during our wedding planning chaos when she was juggling caterers and florists and dress fittings. "Just boring legal stuff," I'd said. "Insurance policies and household financial arrangements." My attorney insists. She'd signed without reading, too distracted by whether to choose orchids or roses for the centerpieces. The prenup was comprehensive. It protected all premarital assets, any future inheritance, and my business holdings. Most importantly, it included a morality clause that voided any financial claims if either party committed adultery. Crystal had just signed away any claim to my father's money and handed me a loaded gun for her own infidelity. Now, 6 years later, watching Derek Palmer's face turn pale as he read the document, I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. I'd married Crystal hoping for love but prepared for war. Turns out I'd needed both. Palmer set down the prenup with trembling hands. "This appears to be comprehensive." Crystal was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. "Richard, what is this? What does it mean?" I smiled for the first time in months. "It means," I said, savoring every word, "that you're entitled to exactly nothing from my father's inheritance. And if certain other provisions are triggered, you might leave this marriage with less than you brought into it." Palmer was speed reading through the document, his face growing paler with each page. Section 4 clearly states that all premarital assets remain separate property. Section 7 protects any inheritance received during the marriage. And Section 12, he stopped reading and looked up at Crystal with something approaching pity. "What's Section 12? Crystal demanded, her voice rising to that shrill pitch that meant she was losing control. I leaned back in my chair, finally enjoying myself. "The morality clause. It voids any spousal support or asset claims if either party commits adultery during the marriage." The silence in that office was deafening. Crystal's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Palmer was frantically flipping through pages, probably looking for any loophole that might save his contingency fee. "You can't prove adultery," Crystal finally whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. I reached into my briefcase again and pulled out a thick manila folder. "Actually, I can, quite comprehensively." The folder contained 6 months of surveillance photos, credit card receipts, hotel records, and text message screenshots. My private investigator had been thorough. Too thorough, really. I'd seen more of my wife's affair than any husband should have to endure. There was Crystal entering the Ritz-Carlton downtown with Brad Martinez, her personal trainer. There she was at the Four Seasons in Austin during what she'd told me was a girls' weekend. Credit card receipts for romantic dinners I hadn't attended, jewelry purchases I hadn't made, lingerie I'd never seen her wear. The text messages were the worst part. Months of explicit conversations about how she was playing the long game with her boring husband until she could cash out and be with the man she really loved. Palmer barely glanced at the evidence before closing the folder. "Mr. Holt, perhaps we should discuss a more reasonable settlement arrangement." But Crystal wasn't going down quietly. "This is entrapment!" "You had me followed like some kind of criminal." "I had you followed like a cheating wife," I corrected, "which, according to this evidence, is exactly what you are." The beautiful mask was finally slipping. Crystal's face contorted with rage, revealing the calculating woman I'd glimpsed in unguarded moments over the past year. "You bastard, do you have any idea what I've sacrificed for this marriage?" "Enlighten me," I said calmly. "I gave you the best years of my life. I played the perfect wife while you buried yourself in work and ignored me." Palmer was tugging at Crystal's sleeve, trying to shut her up, but she was beyond reason now. I earned that money by putting up with your boring friends, your stupid golf stories, your pathetic attempts at romance. You think I enjoyed pretending to care about your engineering projects? Each word was a nail in her own coffin, but she couldn't stop herself. Brad actually listens to me.
He makes me feel alive.
He's everything you're not. Young, exciting, passionate. And broke, I added helpfully. Don't forget broke. Which is probably why he was so interested in my wife with access to a multi-million-dollar inheritance. That stopped her cold. I could see the wheels turning as she realized what I was implying. You think this was all about money? She asked, genuinely seeming hurt for the first time. Crystal, I said gently, I know it was all about money. The question is whether Brad knows that or if he actually thinks you're leaving me for love. The look on her face told me everything I needed to know. That should have been the end of it. Clean victory, case closed, marriage over. But I made a mistake that nearly cost me everything. 3 weeks later, I was having lunch with my old friend Tom Bradley at the country club when I spotted Crystal across the dining room. She was sitting with a man I didn't recognize. Tall, expensive suit, the kind of predatory confidence that screamed lawyer. The smart move would have been to ignore them and finish my meal. Instead, I felt that familiar surge of anger that had been my weakness since childhood. My father always said my temper would be my downfall. He was almost right. I walked over to their table, my blood pressure rising with each step. Crystal, aren't you going to introduce me to your friend? She looked up with that fake smile I'd grown to hate. Richard, this is Marcus Whitman. Marcus, my soon-to-be ex-husband. Whitman stood and extended his hand. I've heard a lot about you, Mr. Holt. Crystal's told me all about your situation. Something in his tone set me off. Maybe it was the smirk, maybe it was the way Crystal was looking at me like I was something she'd scrape off her shoe. But I lost it. Really? Did she tell you about the prenup that's going to leave her with nothing? Did she mention the adultery clause that voids any claim to my inheritance? Crystal's face went white, but Whitman's smile only widened. Actually, she did mention some paperwork. That's exactly what we were discussing. Too late, I realized I'd just made a massive tactical error. By revealing my hand in anger, I'd given them information they could use against me. The smart play would have been to let them walk into court blind, but my temper had blown our advantage. Richard, Crystal said sweetly, you really should be more careful about what you say in public places. You never know who might be listening. I looked around and noticed several other diners had turned to watch our conversation. My outburst had drawn exactly the kind of attention a smart man would avoid. Whitman handed me his business card. Marcus Whitman, private investigator. Mrs. Holt has retained my services to conduct a thorough review of your business practices. My stomach dropped. Crystal wasn't just rolling over and accepting defeat. She was preparing to fight dirty. What's that supposed to mean? Well, Whitman said, examining his fingernails, successful businessmen like yourself sometimes cut corners. Government contracts, building inspections, tax considerations. I'm sure a thorough audit would find everything in perfect order. The threat was clear. They were going to try to destroy my business and reputation if I didn't play ball. Crystal leaned forward, her voice dripping with false concern. Darling, you look upset. Maybe you should sit down. All this stress can't be good for a man your age. I turned and walked away before I could say something even stupider, but the damage was done. By losing my temper, I'd shown them exactly how to hurt me, and Crystal, being Crystal, was already planning her counterattack. The assault on my reputation began within days. It was subtle at first. Whispered conversations that stopped when I entered rooms, questioning looks from longtime clients, invitations that suddenly dried up. Then the rumors started spreading like wildfire through Dallas business circles. Richard Holt was having financial trouble. Richard Holt was cutting corners on safety inspections. Richard Holt had anger management issues and was potentially dangerous to be around. My assistant, Janet, who'd been with me for 12 years, knocked on my office door looking uncomfortable. Mr. Holt, we've had 3 clients call this week asking about project delays and cost overruns. They're concerned about some things they've heard. What kind of things? Questions about your licensing, your insurance coverage, whether you're having personal problems that might affect your work quality. I knew exactly where this was coming from. Crystal and her new pet investigator were conducting a character assassination campaign designed to pressure me into settling. The worst part was, some of it was working. When you run an engineering consulting firm, your reputation is everything. Clients need to trust that you're stable, reliable, and focused on their projects. Whispers about personal drama and potential financial problems were poison in my industry. Marcus Whitman was good at his job. He'd clearly done his homework, targeting exactly the pressure points that would hurt most. He wasn't making specific accusations. That would be slander. Instead, he was asking innocent questions that planted seeds of doubt. "I'm just trying to understand Mr. Holt's current situation," he'd tell potential clients. There seemed to be some complex personal issues affecting his professional focus. "You might want to have your legal team review any existing contracts." The strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. By forcing me to defend my business and reputation, Crystal was trying to make the divorce so costly and distracting that I'd cave and give her a settlement just to make it stop. But she'd underestimated how far I was willing to go to protect what my father had worked his entire life to build. I called Walter Briggs, the attorney who'd been initially reluctant to take my case. "Walter, I need your help. This situation is escalating beyond a simple divorce." "I warned you this might happen," Walter said. "Crystal strikes me as the type who doesn't accept defeat gracefully." "What's she doing?" I explained the rumor campaign and the veiled threats to my business reputation. Walter was quiet for a long moment. "Richard, I have to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Is there anything in your business practices that won't stand up to scrutiny? Any corners cut, any questionable decisions, any regulatory issues?" "Nothing," I said firmly. "My business is clean. I've been paranoid about compliance ever since I started the company." "Good. Because if we're going to war with these people, we need to be absolutely certain our foundation is solid." That's when I realized this wasn't just about the divorce anymore. Crystal had escalated this into a battle for my entire life's work, and I was finally ready to fight back. Walter Briggs was not the kind of lawyer who enjoyed messy fights. At 62, with 35 years of family law behind him, he preferred clean settlements and handshake agreements, which is exactly why he'd been hesitant to take my case in the first place. "Richard, I have to be honest with you," Walter said when I first approached him about the divorce. "I'm not comfortable with scorched earth tactics. I believe in resolving things amicably when possible." "This isn't going to be amicable," I'd warned him. "Crystal is going to fight for every penny, and she's not going to play fair." Walter had seemed skeptical. Most divorce cases feel like war to the people involved, but they usually settle reasonably once emotions cool down. He'd been wrong about Crystal, and now he was seeing exactly what kind of opponent we were facing. The turning point came when Marcus Whitman made the mistake of trying to intimidate Walter directly. Whitman had called Walter's office, claiming to be investigating potential ethical violations in how Walter had handled my prenuptial agreement. He suggested that I might have failed to ensure you received independent counsel, Walter told me during our emergency meeting. Implied that there could be grounds for a malpractice claim against me personally. I watched Walter's face change as he described the conversation. The mild-mannered attorney I'd known for years was being replaced by someone harder and more focused. "That was a mistake," Walter continued. "I've been practicing law since before that little weasel was born. I don't respond well to threats." What Whitman didn't know was that Walter had a reputation for being one of the most meticulous attorneys in Dallas. Every document was perfectly filed, every procedure followed to the letter. The prenup had been executed flawlessly with multiple warnings to both parties and extensive documentation. "They're trying to pressure me into backing down," Walter said, "which tells me they know their position is weak. If they had a legitimate challenge to the prenup, they'd be in court already instead of playing games." Walter opened his case file and spread documents across his conference table. "I've been thinking about this situation, and I believe they're making a fundamental error in strategy." "What do you mean?" "They're fighting a war on multiple fronts, attacking your reputation, threatening legal challenges, trying to intimidate your counsel. That's the approach of someone who's desperate, not someone who's confident in their case." Walter pulled out a yellow legal pad covered with notes. "I think it's time we stopped playing defense and started playing offense." "What are you suggesting?" "Crystal has made this personal by attacking your business and trying to threaten me. That changes the dynamic considerably." Walter's eyes had a gleam I'd never seen before. "If she wants to play dirty, we can play dirty too." "I thought you didn't like scorched earth tactics." Walter smiled for the first time since this mess started. "I don't like them when they're unnecessary. But when someone threatens my professional reputation and tries to intimidate me, that's when the gloves come off." "What do you have in mind?" Walter's plan was elegant in its simplicity. If Crystal wanted to investigate my background, we'd return the favor with interest. "I have a private investigator I've worked with for 20 years, Walter explained. "Sarah is the best in the business, and she specializes in financial fraud cases. If Crystal has any skeletons in her closet, Sarah will find them." Within a week, Sarah had uncovered information that made my blood run cold. Crystal Martinez, her real last name, which she'd changed to Thompson when she started working for the airline, had a history I never could have imagined. 3 previous relationships with older, wealthy men. 2 had ended in substantial settlements. 1 had ended with the man's mysterious suicide and a hefty life insurance payout. The pattern is consistent, Sarah explained during our meeting at Walter's office. She targets successful men going through vulnerable periods, recent widowers, men going through difficult divorces, men dealing with health scares. She provides emotional support, moves the relationship quickly toward marriage, then positions herself to benefit financially when things go wrong. The life insurance case was particularly disturbing. Harold Peterson, a 56-year-old oil executive from Houston, had married Crystal after his wife died in a car accident. 18 months later, Harold was found dead in his home office from an apparent drug overdose. Crystal collected $1, $2 million in life insurance benefits. Was she investigated? I asked, feeling sick. Briefly, Sarah said. But she had an airtight alibi. She was at a spa in Scottsdale when he died. The death was ruled accidental overdose. Harold had been taking prescription painkillers for a back injury. But you don't think it was accidental? Sarah shrugged. I think Crystal Martinez is very good at being somewhere else when convenient things happen to her husbands. Walter was taking notes furiously. This establishes a clear pattern of predatory behavior. Even if we can't prove anything criminal, it shows the court exactly what kind of person we're dealing with. But Sarah wasn't finished. There's more. I traced some of Crystal's recent financial activity. She's been moving money into offshore accounts for the past 6 months, and she's taken out a substantial life insurance policy on you, Richard. The room went dead silent. How substantial? Walter asked quietly. $2 million. She increased it from the original $500,000 policy to $2 million just 3 months ago. Right around the time she started seeing the personal trainer. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. She's been planning to kill me? I don't know, Sarah said honestly, but the timing is suspicious. The policy increase, the affair, the divorce filing, it's all connected somehow. Walter was already reaching for his phone. We need to contact the police immediately. Wait, I said. If we go to the police now, she'll know we're onto her. What if we let her think she's still in control? Walter looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Richard, if there's any chance she's planning to hurt you, what if we use this information to force her hand instead? Make her so desperate that she exposes herself? It was a dangerous gamble, but I was tired of being reactive. Time to see how Crystal handled being hunted instead of being the hunter. Walter thought I was insane, but he agreed to my plan. We would feed Crystal false information that would force her to show her true colors before we reached court. This is incredibly dangerous, Walter warned me for the 10th time. If she really is capable of violence, then we need to know now while we can control the situation, I replied. Better to force her hand when we're ready than wait for her to act on her timeline. The setup was simple. Through carefully orchestrated conversations with mutual friends, we let it slip that I was planning to liquidate some investments and move a substantial amount of cash offshore. The implication was clear. I was trying to hide assets before the divorce finalized. We also arranged for me to have a very public argument with Tom Bradley at the country club, making it seem like our friendship was fracturing under the stress of the divorce. In reality, Tom was helping us create the illusion that I was isolated and vulnerable. The final piece was the most dangerous. I started having dinner alone at the same restaurant every Tuesday night, establishing a predictable routine that would give Crystal opportunities if she was planning something violent. Sarah monitored Crystal's activities while Walter prepared for every possible contingency. We had backup evidence stored in multiple locations, witnesses briefed on what to watch for, and emergency contacts ready. It didn't take long for Crystal to take the bait. Within 2 weeks, Marcus Whitman approached one of my former employees, fishing for information about hidden bank accounts and offshore transactions. Crystal herself started showing up at places where she knew I'd be, playing the role of the heartbroken wife trying to reconcile. Richard, can't we work this out? She pleaded during one staged encounter at my regular restaurant. I know I made mistakes, but we can fix this. I love you. The performance was Oscar-worthy, but I could see the calculation behind her tears. She was positioning herself as the devoted wife trying to save her marriage, creating witnesses who would testify to her loving behavior if something happened to me. The breakthrough came when Sarah discovered Crystal had been researching my medical history, specifically my family's tendency toward heart problems. My father had died of a massive coronary, and my medical records showed elevated cholesterol and blood pressure. She's been asking questions about your prescription medications, Sarah reported. Specifically, whether you take any blood thinners or heart medication that could be dangerous in high doses. That's when we knew for certain that Crystal wasn't just planning to take my money, she was planning to take my life. Walter's face was grim when we met to finalize our court strategy. We have enough circumstantial evidence to destroy her credibility, but proving intent to commit murder is a different matter entirely. We don't need to prove murder, I said. We just need to prove she's a predator who married me for financial gain and has been planning my demise. The court will see the pattern. 3 days before our hearing, Crystal made her final mistake. Crystal's desperation finally got the better of her judgment. 3 days before our court date, she broke into my home office. I was supposed to be out of town on a business trip, another piece of carefully orchestrated theater, but Sarah had installed security cameras throughout the house weeks earlier. We watched in real time as Crystal used her key to enter through the back door at 2:47 a.m. She went straight to my home office, searching through files and opening desk drawers with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly what she was looking for. But the most damning moment came when she found my prescription bottle of blood pressure medication. The cameras captured her dumping half the pills into her palm, examining them carefully, then taking photos with her phone. She was clearly researching how to use my own medication against me. Walter was with me at the surveillance center when it happened. That's it, he said grimly. We call the police right now. Wait, I said, watching Crystal on the monitor. Let's see what else she does. Crystal spent another 20 minutes in my office, photographing financial documents and searching for bank statements. She was clearly looking for evidence of the fictional offshore accounts we'd planted rumors about. Her final act was the most chilling. She opened my laptop. I'd deliberately left it unsecured with false information about a fictitious Cayman Islands account. While she was copying files to a flash drive, she accessed my email and sent herself a copy of my life insurance policy details. She's planning to make it look like suicide, Walter said, his voice barely above a whisper. Financial stress from hidden assets being discovered, mounting legal bills, shame from the divorce. It's the perfect cover story. We had everything we needed. Sarah called her contact at Dallas PD while Walter prepared an emergency motion for a restraining order. By morning, Crystal would find herself facing criminal charges for breaking and entering, attempted fraud, and conspiracy. But Crystal had one more surprise waiting for us. When the police arrived at her apartment with the arrest warrant, they found it empty. Crystal and Brad Martinez had disappeared, along with whatever cash she'd managed to liquidate from their various schemes. Marcus Whitman, however, wasn't so lucky. When the police searched his office, they found extensive files on elderly, wealthy men throughout Texas, a whole network of potential victims that Crystal had been cultivating for her next move. She's done this before, Detective Rodriguez explained. Martinez, Thompson, Williams. She's used at least 6 different names that we know of. This was never about your marriage, Mr. Holt. You were just the latest mark in a very sophisticated long-term fraud operation. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Everything about our relationship had been a lie from the very first moment. Crystal had never loved me, never even liked me. I'd been nothing more than a business transaction to her. But at least now I had the evidence to destroy her in court, if we could find her. Crystal showed up to court after all. 2 hours before our hearing was scheduled to begin, she walked into Judge Martha Coleman's courtroom with a new attorney, some hotshot from Houston who probably cost more per hour than most people make in a month. She looked different. Gone was the perfectly styled trophy wife appearance. Her hair was darker, pulled back severely, and she wore a conservative business suit that made her look older and more serious. She was playing a new role now, the wronged woman fighting for justice. Your Honor, her new attorney began, my client has been the victim of an elaborate frame-up orchestrated by her vindictive husband. The alleged break-in was actually my client retrieving her own personal belongings from the marital home. The so-called surveillance evidence was obtained illegally and without proper warrants. Judge Coleman was not impressed. Counselor, your client fled the jurisdiction when police attempted to serve her with criminal charges. That hardly suggests innocence. My client was in fear for her safety, Your Honor. Mr. Holt has been escalating his threats and harassment. She sought temporary refuge with family members while securing proper legal representation. It was a good strategy, but Crystal had underestimated how much evidence we'd accumulated. Walter methodically presented the surveillance footage, the financial records showing the pattern of fraud, and the documentation of Crystal's previous relationships with wealthy men. The moment that broke her composure came when Walter introduced Harold Peterson's death certificate and insurance payout records. Objection, Crystal's attorney shouted. This is prejudicial and has no bearing on the current proceedings. Your Honor, Walter replied calmly. This evidence establishes a clear pattern of predatory behavior that directly relates to Mrs. Holt's credibility and motives in this marriage. Judge Coleman reviewed the documents with the thoroughness of someone who'd seen every trick in the book. I'll allow it. The pattern is relevant to determining the validity of the marriage contract and the circumstances surrounding its execution. Crystal's mask finally slipped when Walter played the audio recording Sarah had obtained from Marcus Whitman's office. Conversations where Crystal discussed accelerating the timeline and making sure she'd be set for life after I was out of the picture. That's taken out of context, Crystal screamed, jumping to her feet. He's twisting everything! But the damage was done. Judge Coleman had heard enough. Mrs. Holt, your prenuptial agreement is valid and enforceable. Your claims for spousal support and asset division are denied. Furthermore, I'm recommending that the district attorney's office pursue criminal charges for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Crystal's face went through a spectrum of emotions: shock, rage, and finally a cold calculation that chilled me to the bone. This isn't over, Richard, she said quietly as the bailiffs moved to escort her out. You have no idea what you've started. The threat was clear, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I'd faced down a predator and won. Victory, it turns out, is expensive even when you win. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I was sitting in my new apartment in Austin, having sold my Dallas house and relocated my business. Crystal was serving 18 months in federal prison for fraud and conspiracy, but her final threat had proven prophetic. The scandal had cost me dearly. 3 major clients terminated their contracts, spooked by the media coverage of my Black Widow wife and the sensational trial. The story had everything reporters loved: sex, money, attempted murder, and a wealthy businessman who'd been played for a fool. My relationship with my daughter Sarah was slowly healing, but it had been rocky for months. She'd liked Crystal, and the revelation that her stepmother had potentially been planning to kill me was traumatic for a 22-year-old college student. Dad, how could you not see what she was? Sarah had asked during one of our difficult conversations. The honest answer was that I hadn't wanted to see it. Crystal had given me something I desperately needed after Jennifer's death: the feeling of being desired and alive again. I'd ignored red flags because acknowledging them would have meant admitting I was just another lonely old man being used for his money. The financial cost was significant too: legal fees, private investigators, increased security, and the business revenue I'd lost during the chaos added up to nearly $400,000. Not enough to bankrupt me, but enough to hurt. Walter Briggs had become an unexpected friend through the ordeal. You did the right thing, he told me over drinks at his club. That woman was a predator. If you hadn't stopped her, she would have moved on to her next victim. That knowledge helped, but it didn't erase the fundamental humiliation of being so completely deceived. Every mutual friend who'd met Crystal, every business colleague who'd attended our wedding, every family member who'd welcomed her, they all knew I'd been played. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd protected my father's inheritance through careful legal planning, but I'd nearly lost everything anyway through sheer emotional stupidity. Tom Bradley, my oldest friend, summed it up best. Richard, you survived something that would have destroyed most men. Yeah, it cost you money and pride, but you're alive and free. That's worth more than any inheritance. He was right, but some lessons are more expensive than others. These days, I'm more careful about who I trust and why. The prenup saved my financial life, but experience taught me something more valuable: that the most dangerous predators are the ones who make you feel like prey who's finally found a protector. Crystal Martinez is scheduled for release next year. I hear she's already planning her appeal and looking for her next mark. But that's someone else's problem now.